Hi friends, hope you're doing great, and today I'm back with my another session on debugging in Dynamics CRM, specifically saying debugging a plugin in Dynamics CRM. And there are multiple reasons why we need to debug it. Let's say you have developed a plugin, it works all good on your environment, but when you deploy it on higher environment, you are facing challenges to it. Or a specific user is facing a challenge whenever they are executing that particular action on which you have registered your plugin, and now you are confused how to do it, what to do it, and when to do it. And so I am in here so as to share all the ways in which a plugin can be debugged in Dynamics CRM, and we would be covering multiple ways, which includes tracing services, like utilizing the utilizing the tracing services in Dynamics CRM while writing a plugin or while debugging a plugin. Then using one of the easiest ways so as to debug a plugin when you have access to the code is the console application. And last not the least, the profiler way, in which we create a profile of a plugin and then we debug the same. So let's move ahead with exploring all these ways of debugging a plugin in Dynamics CRM. So first, and the most important way in which I would be targeting debugging a plugin or creating a logs of a plugin is utilizing the tracing services. And for that, if you can recall, in my previous tutorial I shared with you that while writing a plugin, we pass a parameter to our execute method of type iServiceProvider, which gives you a lot of information like the contextual information and also access to multiple services. And one of the service is iTracing service, that is which is used or which helps us so as to create trace logs in Dynamics. What exactly is trace log and where I should see it? Let's first target that area. So what exactly happens is, in Dynamics CRM, whenever you would go to the admin panel, in the admin panel there is a specific entity, plugin tracing logs. See, plugin trace logs. Now I am using happens is, you need to go to your Dynamics CRM instance. In the admin panel, you would see under the settings, you would be seeing this plugin tracing log. Now this is a default entity in Dynamics CRM. It is more of a feature of Dynamics CRM. You need not to create this entity, you need not to do anything. Just by utilizing the tracing service log or tracing service, you would be able to create records in here. And when you create a record, that record contains each and every information, like which assembly has been used, which message center, what is your primary entity, and everything out in there. Every information is available, like persistence key, plugin registration ID, what type of the operation, the most important, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. And in here in the message block, you would be able to see the exception out in there. Now to create or to access this tracing log entity, you need to have a system customizer role or a developer role with elevated permissions. But for sure, you need not to have access to the code, because you have created the code, you push the code into the environment, it got deployed to your higher environment, and whenever the code will start running, it will start on creating the tracing log. Now the question could be, hey Sumit, I have almost 200 users who would be using my application, and it would be a lot of memory consumption or data consumption if we keep on creating the logs for everything. And for the same, if you go under the system settings, what exactly happens is, you have this configuration, enable logging to plugin tracing logs. In here you need to share what type of tracing logs you want to create, whether you want it to be created for everything, whether you want it to be created only in case of an exception, or you simply want to switch it off. Usually in production environments, what we do is we enable it only for exceptions, so that whenever any user who is using the application faces any challenge, an exception tracing log would be created. And we as developers, we keep an eye on this tracing log entity through a scheduler, like let's pull out all the records through this scheduler and send an email to our developer team that these exceptions have been generated in our data during our user experience. And accordingly the users could accordingly the developers can work around, can use these logs so as to identify the issues and resolve these issues in upcoming hotfixes or upcoming regular deployments. So now let's look at a code how to enable or how to write a code wherein the tracing logs could be generated in the application. So for that you need to have access to your Visual Studio and definitely to your assembly, whichever you are registering in Dynamics CRM. Now you need to have this service enabled, like you need to get this service out of your service provider parameter which has been passed. You would be getting eye tracing service. In eye tracing service, we can create this variable of any type or any name. So I usually create it by the name of tracing service so as to keep it simple and like I can utilize it anyway. So wherever we want to, on whatever the line we want to create the tracing service log, the log or a record in my tracing entity, then I can simply write it like tracing service dot trace and the message I want to pass in there. Now what exactly happens is whenever my code get executed based upon my configuration, the configurations I have done in here, like let's say I want to create the tracing log for all the things and everything. So once it has been created in there, for sure whenever this code gets executed, this particular line will get printed in my trace log entity. Now I know my code gets triggered all well, my line number is all well. Now this is something working till here. Now let's say I want to print the name of the entity. So what I did is I added the tracing service dot trace string dot format, name of the entity, entity verified, and the name of the entity. So whenever this code gets executed, it will print both the lines, line number 24, line number 36. And by this way, I am sure that yes, my code is working all good till line number 36. Now, if you can see in my exception block, I also added my exception in here so that whenever an exception occurs, it shows an exception for sure on the user screen. But at the same time, a log is created in my tracing entity. That way, me as a developer, I would be able to track what exactly error or issue has been faced by my user by going through the tracing log entity. So the code remains the same, your logic remains the same, everything remains the same, just you keep on adding these tracing logs as per your need and requirement. Let's register this code into the application. I am building it my assembly, and then I would be updating my code into my CRM instance. So let's register it. I'm just updating it. So this way my updated code would be in the environment. And now so the plugin has been registered, update. Let's wait for the pop-up. So the pop-up is here. So the registered assembly has been updated. Okay. And now I'm going in my environment. So I'm back in my environment in here. Now I'm back in my environment. Now let's try creating a record. So as of now, let's go in plugin tracing log and let's see how many records are there. As of now, there are 4 records which have been created yesterday. Now let's try creating a new record in here. Let's say the topic is Y11, Z11 and X1. And let's save this record. Now what exactly happens is, if you can recall, we have a plugin which is executing on pre-creation or pre-operation of create operation and post-operation of a create. So what will happen is, based upon our logic, this code will get executed and the tracing logs would be created in here. Let's see. See, one of the trace log has been created for our pre-operation and another. So let's open this. Now in here you have every information how this trace log has been created. First thing is, it has been created by this assembly, this particular step. This is the version of your assembly which has been published there. Now let's move down. See, my entire message, lead pre-operation plugin, entity verified is lead. So this is being created because as of now I have selected as all in here. But if I would have selected exception, then this particular log would not have been created because it's not an exception out in here. Now see another post operation plugin wherein I am receiving an exception. So in case I would write, I have this exception with everything in here. See, lead entity it contains the attribute with job title equals to this. And this gives me a clarity as a developer that there is an issue with my code or with the environment and I have to resolve this. And to resolve this issue, I simply need to go to my post operation, job title 1. Yeah, here it is. I simply need to change it to job title, save it, and register the assembly back into the environment. And you will see using the trace in logs, I have been able so as to perform this action. That is, I have been able to debug my code or identify the issue which is being faced by my user out in the real-time environment. And I hope like this would help you in your real-time implementations of the project. Now the second way which I have mentioned is a console application. Now this is one of the best way I have been using. I have been using this for a long period of time. The reason for this is it helps me in multiple things. It helps me in performing unit testing as well as debugging my code in real sense. And at times it also helps me to identify, validate the code functionalities, because what happens is once you build a plugin, you register it into the environment, then it's all gone. You don't have a control and doing every operation is pretty tough. So what I do is usually I add a project. So what I do is I add a project of console application. Let's say add a new project, console application.NET framework. I simply add this in here in my environment. Usually for this console application, the .NET framework which needs to be opted is 4.6.2. Now once we have this, what exactly happens is a demo environment is created. Program is created for us. Now what are the things what a plugin does? What usually the plugin does it, what we need to do is we create a context of a service, we get a service, and then we pass that service to a method and perform that action. What if I create this service in a console application and then just call my plugins out in there? And that's how I do it. So what we need to do is we need to go to our Active Directory. First thing, the most important aspect. So I am in my Active Directory in here. We need to generate client ID and client secret. So just go to your Azure portal. It's there in most of. Go to your Active Directory in there. I'm trying to explore or trying to share each and every step which we need to follow. Just go to the environment, Azure Active Directory. In here, go for your application registration. You need to go for this application registration. In here, we would be creating an application. So let's say I created, just simply say new registration, and we need to simply register it into the Azure network. We can say, so let's say Dynamics 2 and simply say register it. Then this app has been registration. Now after the app has been registration, we need to give it required permissions. So let's say I give it to the API permissions of Dynamics CRM instance so that it can communicate to Dynamics. So I'm just clicking on API permissions out in here. I add a permission. Dynamics CRM. Yes, Dynamics CRM. I'm user impersonation, add this permission. And once this permission is added, we need to grant this permission so that this environment app registration is complete. Now the app registration has been completed in here. Now the second step is this app has to be given, the person Dynamics 3 which we have created has to be given a required role and permission in Dynamics CRM so that it can pull the required data from CRM instance of yours. So we go to the Power Admin Center in there, that is admin.microsoft.powerportal.com, powerplatform.com. Go to your environment. In the environment, we need to select the environment in which we want to connect this particular app registration. We go in here, we click on settings, and in here users and application users. The moment we select the application users, we get a request app new user, create an app. See, it will populate all the users. See, Dynamics 3 which we have recently registered, we add it in here. To the business unit is my default business unit. What role I want to assign to it? So for now, let's say I have assigned a system admin to it. Usually, like, it depends upon the project how we want to do it, whether we want to give it a smaller permission set because we would be creating multiple app registrations for multiple functionality, or we simply assign a security system admin or system customizer because it would be a common between multiple environments or multiple things which would be performed by multiple applications. So now this Dynamics 3 app registration has been done directly in Dynamics CRM. So now what exactly happens is, if you have the credentials of Dynamics 3 app user, app registered, then it would be able to communicate to your Power Platform environment. And for that, now I need to generate client secret in there because I would be using client secret and ID for the same. So I am generating a client secret for it because I need to use it in my code. So let's say app ID, add it. So now this value would be generated, and please be ensured to copy it. The moment you will refresh this screen, this would be hidden. Let's say I refresh it. So it would be now hidden. I don't have access to it at all. And to overcome this challenge, it's always recommended that the moment this app ID and the password is created, the secret ID and the client ID is created, simply copy it to an environment or anything like a notepad, work note of your choice to ensure that you are not losing it. Now we are all set. Like, we have an app user which is all connected to Dynamics CRM instance. It has got API permissions and the app ID and secret ID is there. So by using this particular code of line, like let's say you have to add these particular DLLs out in there, like Microsoft.crm.sdk.message, Microsoft.xrm.sdk, Microsoft.xrm.tooling.connector, and you need not to worry about how to add it. Simply click on references, manage Nuget packages, and you would be able to search all these online in here without any issues. Like, you simply copy it and paste it and it would be visible. In there we have an iOrganization method out in there, using which we can create a service instance of Dynamics CRM. Now we have service, organization service would be available. The only way is we simply add a reference to your plugin in here, project reference. So we would be adding a project reference to my class, say YouTube plugin. So now it's in here. See, it would be here. Now reference has been added. I simply need to make this post operation, let's say a public method, just for validating and testing. I am here. So what I would say, YouTube plugin dot post operation p1 equals to new YouTube plugin post operation. So I have a now p1 dot, so my method is post operation. I saved it, I didn't build it because I now want to call it in there. So I would be directly calling this method in there, and it would be like a magic happening. P1 probably I'm making some mistake. Let's add it using it's not getting exposed in here. For sure I would be able to do it, just give me a moment. Post operation plugin public static void. Yeah, so it's So the reason why I was not able to call it, it was having a static in here. I just removed that static, and now see p1 dot create contact is visible to me, and I need to pass two things, entity and service. Entity is my lead. So let's check in our code what is the entity. Entity.id. So we need to pass an object of entity.id, or let's change this code just for our reference, like entity.create. Okay, so that is not needed exactly, but in real time we pass an ID of the entity because I was referring it in here. So what happens is I have this, I am marking the code as job title 1, so as to ensure what exactly goes wrong in here. I add a try catch block in here, try, so that we know what exactly is wrong going in here. Exception ex, and let's say tracing service, or simply say throw the exception. Okay, let's check now executing this code. So what exactly this code would, okay, I need to pass the entity, so I'm passing it as, I'm just changing my code. I'm not using the entity anymore. There is a way out, I will tell you that also if needed. Just feel free to ping me on, or like comment in the video. See, now it's all good. So now what will happen is, whenever I will execute my code, the code will get a response as a service, an organization service I will pass to my plugin, to my this method, and it will in terms on my screen will trigger my code. Let's try doing it. So I'm in here, I simply say run my code. So what happens is, in the background it will get connected to CRM instance, and the CRM instance will get connected. Okay, there are some issues with it. Let's see. Are we allowed to pass the null? Yes, we are allowed to pass the null. So let's do it this way. Let's start. So now it will get connected to dynamic CRM instance, will generate an organization service. The service we would be passing to my plugin method directly to debug it on my screen in real time. So see, my organization service is there. Now let's say F10. So I'm in here, I will simply say continue. See, I am on my line, entity x1 equals to new entity lead. I would be able to debug it every line. See, exception has been given, and what is the exception? Lead entity doesn't contain the attribute with name job title 1 equals to name mapping equals to logical. So in this way, what will happen is, you would be able to modify, change, or validate or unit test your code or plugins in real terms on your screen, on your Visual Studio itself, and that will help you to avoid a lot of problems. Usually on the projects I work, I ensure that I have a unit test case created for everything. In here, I can create a program wherein I would be passing 10 inputs through here, and I would be checking whether all those 10 inputs works good or not, like checking my validation and everything. And that's how we debug a code in Java in plugin using a console application. The steps are pretty much clear. We need to go to our Active Directory. We need to register our app, need to associate it to your dynamic CRM instance, have to add a required rules and permission in there, need to generate the client ID and the secret ID, and then need to pass those in the here client ID, client secret, and your URL to your organization. Once you are connected, you would be able to get a organization service response, and then that service response can be passed to your plugin methods based upon your requirement. Once you are able to validate and approve the things, the last and not the least, what you have to do is, if you wish, you can simply make it as a private method so that it's not accessible from anywhere outside your plugin assembly. That has been a concern by one of my client or one of my code reviewer, that these methods are public. Hey Sumit, kindly update them as private, and I did it. But whenever I need to deploy it or I build an assembly, I have a unit test coverage using the console applications, and I have been using it for a couple of years and I'm pretty comfortable using the same. And that's how we perform the console application way of debugging a code in Dynamics CRM. Now I would be targeting the third area, that is using Plugin Profiler to debug your code and the advantages associated with it. Now let's proceed ahead with the Plugin Profiler in here. So what exactly is a Plugin Profiler? The name itself defines it. It's a profile. So what exactly happens is, let's first discuss the use case scenario. So let's say you are working on your environments and your code is working all good, but one of the business user is reporting some issues in there while performing the action, and you have tried everything in here, but you want to test or validate your code using the exact profile of the user who has been doing that action. That is, you want to execute your code with context as user X, so that you get exactly the same information, like what were the input parameters, what were the output parameters, what was the trigger action, and everything in there. And it's pretty complicated process, I would say, and I would be now showing you on my screen. So first thing, the most important thing is you need to open your plugin registration tool, and in there you have to install this button. You have to click on this button to install the profiler. What exactly will happen is the plugin registration tool will install this solution in the environment, which would be setting up your profile. Now there are two ways. Let's say you enable this plugin profiler. Whenever the user faces a challenge, you request them to download the log and share it with you, and you use it so as to execute your code multiple times so as to identify the issue. Other way could be that you create a record in application and then use the reference of that record so as to execute your plugin. In my demo, I would be showing you the steps by which you would be creating a record in an entity, persistence entity. The plugin profiler, once installed, it would be creating at its own. Then we would be attaching that code, that profile or that persistence ID to our plugin Visual Studio, and then we'll be trying to execute our code in the same context the way it is being executing for that particular user. So plugin profiler is for sure one of the best ways so as to do it. So every type of debugging has its own benefits and have its own disadvantages. So like in tracing logs, so like eye tracing service, which we have initially discussed, it's more about creating your tracing logs. Now for that you don't need any code in your application, or no setup is needed on your machine. You simply, whenever it gets executed, the execution logs or exceptions are created in there, which can be referred by you or your development team or anyone in future anytime. The second way which we have discussed is console application. The best part about it is it can be used so as to debug a plugin in real time on your machine, but for the same you need access to your code, as well as you need the application IDs and the secret key and the password in there so as to get a reference of your organization service. The third one which we are discussing is the profiler way. It is used so as to use the same context, exactly the same context in which a user is reporting a concern, using that profile values so as to execute your code, so that you are wearing the same shoes as your user and you are able to replicate those issues. And for this, again, you need your plugin registration tool and the code on your machine. Then only you would be able to undertake this action. So first step in here is so as to install the profiler on your system or on your application, on your organization, using the plugin registration tool. So I am doing it, that it takes almost 5-6 minutes so as to get this installed on the machine. So on my screen you can see the profiler has been installed successfully, and we can see this message pop up out in there. Once that has been done, then we need to identify which plugin we want to start profiling of. like which plugin is creating an issue for the user. So let's say I say start profiling for this particular plugin, or let's say post operation one, because that was something start profiling. So see, when you want to do it, whether you want only in the case of exception or whether you want it to be created as a persistence key. So I am saying create to an entity recommended. Okay. So now it will create a record in my persistence entity. And the second thing which we need to do is opening our Visual Studio. So our code is little different in here. So let's say it like this, so that this. So now it's create contact entity job title 1. Okay, now let's save it, let's build it. I'm just building my latest code out in here, and then we would be doing attaching the plugin registration code in here. The tool has to be added in here, and for that we need to use the key Ctrl Alt and P. So it gives you all the processes. We need to attach the plugin registration process in here. See, plugin registration attach. Now it has been attached in here. Okay. It's setting up. It takes a minute. And now once everything is in place, like your plugin registration tool has been attached, Visual Studio has been attached, the code has been attached, simply click on this button, replay plugin execution. Now it gives you an option to select the profiles. So let's select the profile if you have downloaded it, else we simply click in here. So as of now there is no profile created. So let's first create a profile in CRM by performing the action out in there. So I am back in my environment. I simply say it, I'm just closing this for now. Let the user perform the action in there. So let's say the user is here and he wants to perform this action. So he wants to save the record so that a profile is created in there. So he is trying to save the record, for which an error will happen and a persistence key or a profile would be created there. So I'm saving the record. It takes a little while. Record has been created, and let's check whether the profile has been created or not. So I'm just opening my advanced file. There is a specific entity, or we can simply go to our plugin registration tool, download the same. See, now the profile has been created. Let's select it. Its second operation, it asks us so as to attach the assembly to it, the code assembly DLL, and the third action would be the plugin which we want to select. See, the post operation plugin has been selected in here. It will show you both the option pre and post. Post operation is our thing, and we simply say start my execution. The moment we will start our execution, it will hit back our Visual Studio, the code, and we would be all set so as to debug the plugin in here. It's pretty tedious process in here. A lot of steps are there, so don't get confused. See, now my code is in here. I can debug it every line. I simply click on continue. So it's gave me a throw an exception. Lead entity doesn't have a logical name, and that's the reason why it is failing. So that's how we perform. Now I have not been using F10 because the moment I would be using F10, then it would give me an exception out in there. And that's the reason I just want to overcome that challenge. So this is how we do it. We have plugin profilers in there. We have tracing logs and the console application. And that's all how we do it. Thanks for watching my video, and for sure Please feel free to reach me in the comment section for any of your queries or concerns out in there. Thank you and have a great day.